Let's build something exciting. Recently, OpenAI introduced GPTs, which allows anyone to create their own tailored version of GPT using their own data. You can now easily create your own custom GPTs by providing as input your own knowledge base. OpenAI made creating your own GPT a very straightforward process. The only challenging part is to gather all the data your GPT will need. This data can be just about anything, for example, PDFs or text files. But for this demo, the data and knowledge for our GPT will be an entire website. That's right. We'll be crawling and scraping an entire website to generate all the knowledge we will feed into our GPT. And don't worry if that sounds too complicated because we're going to be using BuildShip to create our web crawler. BuildShip is a low-code visual backend builder that allows you to create scalable APIs, schedule tasks, cloud functions, and much more while harnessing the power of AI. The website we'll be crawling and scraping is the BuildShip documentation site. This is the learning center for everything BuildShip. And by the end of this video, we'll have our own custom GPT that we can use to ask questions related specifically to BuildShip. Let's get building. Here in the BuildShip dashboard, there's many templates to help you quickly get started building your backend. Let's select the GPT crawler template to get started. This will create a fully completed workflow for us that we can start using to crawl any URL. But before we deploy this workflow, let's take some time to go through each node in this workflow so that you understand how it works. The first node we have here is a special one. This is a trigger node. Specifically, this is a REST API called trigger. In BuildShip, the entry point of any workflow will always be a trigger, and a trigger is responsible for starting the execution of the workflow. For this API called trigger, we're setting the path of the endpoint to crawl, and the HTTP method is set to post. And whenever we deploy this workflow, we'll get a publicly accessible API endpoint that any external client can use to execute our workflow. And just like that, we've reached the most important node in our workflow. This is, of course, the crawler node. This node will recursively crawl whatever URL we send in the request body. The only required input for this node is the starting URL, and this is, of course, the URL to start the crawling from. As mentioned, we're getting this value from the request body. All other inputs here are optional. Max request will dictate the maximum number of requests to be executed per crawl, and max concurrency will dictate the number of crawls to run in parallel. You may find the selector input useful for your use case. For example, this would be useful if you only care to scrape a specific section of the page. But in this demo, we will just default to scraping the entire page. Let's take a look at what this node will return. To do that, we'll open the code panel. This is where the underlying code for this node resides. And we're going to go to the output tab. Now here we can see that we're going to return an output, which is of type object. And more importantly, we'll return in that object an items field that will contain all the crawl pages. We're also returning a count field, which returns the total pages crawled. With that in mind, let's move on to the next node in our workflow. This is the object to base64 node, and this node will convert a given object to a base64 string. And we're saying here that the object we want to convert to a base64 string is the items array that we previously looked at, returned from the crawler node. And the reason we're doing this is because by converting the scraped content to a base64 string, we'll be able to take advantage of BuildShip's upload base64 file node to upload the scraped content to the BuildShip storage. Speaking of storage, every BuildShip workspace comes out of the box with its own cloud storage bucket. And you can quickly preview what files are in this storage bucket by going to the storage tab of your project settings. And this is where you will have a high-level overview of any files you've uploaded to storage. Great. So now what we want to do is take all the scraped pages that we've previously converted to base64 string and upload it to the BuildShip storage. And for that, we're going to be using the upload base64 file node that BuildShip gives us out of the box for uploading base64 file. The first input here, base64 file, is for the base64 string. And we're getting this value from the object to base64 node. Next, for the file name, because we don't want to override any existing files, we provide a unique name. There's numerous ways that you can devise a unique name in BuildShip, but the easiest way to do this is by using the JavaScript date.now function, which returns the current time in milliseconds. And we're appending at the end here output.json. Now, when the base64 file is uploaded to the BuildShip storage, it will return a publicly accessible URL that we can use to load the file. But by default, when we open this URL in our browser, it will render the contents of the file. Instead, what we want to do is prompt the user to download the file. So the next input here, prompt download, when set to true, will prompt the user to download the file when accessing the public URL that's returned from this node. The final step in this workflow is to return the download URL back to the client. For this, we're using a return node, and we're setting the status code to OK. And the value we want to return is the download URL returned by the upload base64 file node. Remember, this is the file that contains all the scrape pages, and this is what we will use to provide knowledge when creating our own custom ChatGPT. Now we can ship and deploy our workflow. Great, our deployment was successful, and now we can start putting our workflow to the test. The great thing about BuildShip is that we don't have to use an external REST API client to test out our workflow. We can do all of this without leaving BuildShip. BuildShip gives us the ability to test our entire workflow, or by testing individual nodes by opening up the code panel, and on the left-hand side, we can enter values to test the node against. But for now, we'll focus on testing the entire workflow end-to-end. If you recall, the only required value we need to pass to our crawler node is the starting URL. This value is of course coming from the request body as a URL field. So with that in mind, let's test our workflow. We'll select the test option at the top, navigate to the body tab, and here we'll set the request body. In our case, we only need to send the URL, which is currently set to docs.buildship.com. Now we can test the workflow. This will execute and test each node in our workflow using the request body. Notice the green success indicator icon, which can be clicked on to further expand the result returned by the node. For example, our crawler node here is returning all the scrape pages, which is exactly what we want. If any of the tests fails, then we would be greeted instead with a red exclamation mark. But in our case, all the nodes are working as expected. If we go back to the test dropdown, we can see that the final output of the workflow is the download URL of the file we uploaded. Let's copy it and we'll open it in a new tab, and we're now prompted to download the file. So let's just save it as output. If we preview the file, we'll see that it contains the entire scrape content returned from our crawler node in JSON format. Great. Now we can use this as knowledge when creating our custom ChatGPT. Now let's start creating our custom ChatGPT. In ChatGPT, we'll go to Explore. From here, we'll select Create GPT. And now we can start configuring our GPT. First, let's give it a name. We'll call it BuildShip Assistant. And next, we'll set the description to help with learning BuildShip. Next, we'll add in our instructions, which will control how our GPT will behave. And now for the important part, the knowledge of our GPT. We'll upload the JSON file we previously downloaded. And for now, we don't need any other capabilities enabled. And that's it. We can now save our GPT. Awesome. Our GPT is now created. Now it's time to put it to the test. Let's see how knowledgeable our GPT is about BuildShip. We'll add a question. What is the Generate with AI feature about? And it's saying the Generate with AI feature in BuildShip is designed for building custom nodes. That is 100% correct. Let's try one more time. This time we'll ask it, does BuildShip have any integrations with Supabase? Wow, this is exciting. Our GPT is working flawlessly. How fun was that? BuildShip makes it incredibly easy to create your own GPT using your own data. And this is just one of the ways how you can use BuildShip to help you create your own AI-powered applications. So what are you waiting for? Give BuildShip a try today and start bringing your ideas to life. That's all for now. See you in the next one.